The sky above Hyjal tore open. Not with thunder or warning, but with the quiet violence of something fundamental breaking. A spiral of light twisted against the stars, and from its center, a figure fell. Escanor hit the ground without ceremony. His body, small and frail in the darkness, lay still among the scorched grass. The druids who found him spoke in hushed tones, their words careful as if naming what they saw might make it more real. "He's breathing," one said, kneeling beside the stranger. The man's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, his frame so slight it seemed the wind might carry him away. Orange hair fell across a face lined with exhaustion, and his clothes bore no mark of any kingdom they knew. But the heat radiating from his skin told a different story. "Feel that?" Another druid extended her palm above the fallen man, then pulled back sharply. "It's not fever. It's something else." The air around them shimmered with residual warmth, as if the stranger had passed through fire itself. Where he lay, the grass had already begun to wither, curling at the edges like paper held too close to flame. "We should move him to the temple," the first druid said, but his companion shook her head. "Look at the sky." The wound in reality had not closed. It hung above them like an eye, its edges flickering with colors that had no names. Through it they could see nothing, not darkness, not light, but an absence that made their minds ache to comprehend. "Whatever brought him here," she whispered, "it's still watching." Escanor's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and afraid. He saw shapes moving around him, heard voices speaking words he didn't recognize. His body felt wrong, hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything that made him himself and left only the shell. "Please," he managed, his voice barely audible. Where am I?" The druids exchanged glances. One of them knelt closer, her expression softening with something like pity. "You're in Hyjal," she said, though she doubted he understood. "You're safe." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. The first rays of dawn broke across the mountain peaks. Escanor's body went rigid. The change came not gradually, but all at once like a dam breaking. Light poured into him from the rising sun, and his frail form began to shift. Muscle swelled beneath his skin, his height increasing with each heartbeat. The druid stumbled backward as the heat intensified, the air itself distorting around him. "What is he, Pa?" someone shouted, but there was no time for answers. Escanor stood, and the man who rose was not the one who had fallen. His frame towered above them now, broad-shouldered and imposing, every line of his body radiating controlled power. When he opened his eyes, they burned with an inner radiance that had nothing to do with magic, as the druids understood it. "Who decided," he said, his voice deep and measured, "that I required protection?" The words carried no malice, but the druids felt them like physical weight. This was not arrogance, they realized. It was simple fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had never known doubt. One of the younger druids stepped forward, his hand moving toward the staff at his back. "You need to come with us. We don't know what you are, but I am Escanor." He said it as if the name explained everything. "And I am precisely where I am meant to be." The heat grew stronger. The small pool nearby began to steam its surface, bubbling as the water evaporated. Plants wilted in expanding circles around him, their leaves turning brown and brittle. The druids could feel sweat running down their backs, despite the mountain's perpetual cool. "This isn't natural," one of them breathed. "He's like a walking sun," deep beneath their feet in the volcanic heart of the Firelands. Ragnaros, the Fire Lord, felt it too. The presence registered not as threat, but as challenge. Something had entered his domain, something that radiated solar heat without flame light, without burning. It was wrong in ways that offended the very concept of elemental fire. The Fire Lord's consciousness expanded through the layers of stone and magma, searching for the source of this anomaly. When he found it standing on the surface world and radiating impossible warmth, his rage ignited like a supernova. "No," The word rumbled through the earth itself. In Hyjal, the druids felt the ground tremble, saw cracks spiderwebbing across the scorched soil around Escanor's feet. Molten rock bubbled up through the fissures, and the temperature that had been merely uncomfortable became suddenly unbearable. "Run!" someone shouted, but the command was unnecessary. The druids were already retreating, their animal forms blurring into motion as they fled toward the safety of Nordrassil. Escanor stood alone as the earth split open beneath him. He fell through fire and stone, the world inverting as gravity lost meaning. The descent seemed to last both seconds and hours, reality bending around him until he couldn't tell up from down. Then, with an impact that drove the breath from his lungs, he struck solid ground. The fireland stretched before him in terrible grandeur. Rivers of molten rock carved paths through obsidian plains, and the air itself rippled with heat that would have killed any mortal instantly. At the chamber's heart, rising from a lake of liquid fire, stood Ragnaros. The Fire Lord had taken physical form, his body a mountain of animated flame and volcanic fury. Eyes like burning coals fixed on Escanor with undisguised hatred. "You dare bring alien light into my domain?" Ragnaros's voice was the sound of continents, cracking of mountains being born. The fire of this world bows to no other radiance. Escanor straightened slowly, dusting ash from his shoulders with deliberate care. When he looked up at the towering elemental, his expression held neither fear nor aggression, only mild interest, as if cataloging a particularly unusual insect. "I brought nothing, my son." "Rambathan," he said. "The sun brought me. There is a difference." Then the sun made a mistake. Ragnaros raised one massive arm, and the molten lake around him surged upward. "And I will correct it." Fire crashed down like a tidal wave. Escanor didn't dodge, he simply stood, one hand raised almost lazily. The flames struck an invisible barrier inches from his skin and parted around him, flowing past like water around a stone. Where they touched, they didn't burn. They evaporated, consumed by a heat that made even the Fire Lord's inferno seem cold by comparison. "Interesting," Escanor observed. "Your flame has passion, but passion without substance is merely noise." He moved, then closing the distance between them with speed that defied his size. One fist drove forward, not wreathed in fire or crackling with magic, but simply backed by raw, inexorable force. It connected with Ragnaros's form, and the impact sent shockwaves through the chamber. The Fire Lord staggered. For the first time in eons, he felt something alien to his nature. Not pain exactly, but the recognition that something existed which could affect him at all. "Impossible," he rumbled, reforming his damaged section with fresh magma. "You are flesh, mortal. Nothing mortal can..." "Careful." Escanor's voice cut through the protest with quiet authority. "The sun cares nothing for what you believe is possible." They clashed again and again, each exchange shaking the foundations of the Firelands. Ragnaros summoned every technique refined over millennia, hurling meteors of compressed flame, calling forth eruptions from the lake itself. Escanor met each attack with neither technique nor strategy, only overwhelming presence. He was the immovable object, the unstoppable force, the paradox, made flesh. And he was winning. The magma around Ragnaros began to crystallize, cooling, despite the Fire Lord's desperate attempts to maintain its temperature. The impossible heat radiating from this mortal, this insult to natural law, was actually stealing the fire from his fire. "You will not." Ragnaros's voice cracked like breaking stone. "I am eternal, I am." The Fire Lord's entire being condensed, drawing power from the core of his realm. The temperature spiked beyond anything the Firelands had known, the very air igniting. This was his final technique, the attack that had shattered armies and broken demigods. He unleashed it, the column of fire that erupted would have vaporized mountains. It struck Escanor dead center, engulfing him completely in white-hot fury. For a moment, even the arrogant mortal's silhouette vanished in the inferno. Then the flames parted. Escanor stood unmarked, his expression unchanged. He brushed a speck of ash from his mustache with 2 fingers, the gesture somehow more devastating than any counterattack. "Was that your best?" he asked, and there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. How disappointing. Ragnaros felt something he had not experienced since his binding began fear. The mortal raised one hand, and the heat in the chamber doubled, tripled. The Fire Lord's own flames began to dim, starved of energy, by the presence of something more fundamental than fire itself. This wasn't magic. It wasn't elemental power. It was simply the sun, and the sun did not negotiate. Escanor's fist began to descend, and Ragnaros knew with absolute certainty that this blow would unmake him. Then the light changed. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a golden brilliance that had nothing to do with flame. The very air crystallized into geometric patterns of pure radiance, and through them stepped a being of terrible beauty. The Naru called AzeRoth manifested above the battlefield, its form a shifting constellation of light and sacred energy. Where it appeared, Ragnaros's fire retreated, not conquered, but simply deemed irrelevant. Enough. The word resonated on frequencies that bypassed sound, entirely speaking directly to the consciousness of those who heard it. "This one is not yours to destroy, Fire Lord." Tendrils of light wrapped around Escanor, gentle but inexorable. He felt himself being pulled away from the Fireland's Ragnaros's furious roar, fading as distance and dimensional boundaries reasserted themselves. The last thing he saw before the realm vanished completely was the Fire Lord's burning gaze filled with a promise that this was far from over. Then he stood in a chamber of purest white, and the Naru's many-faceted attention turned fully upon him. "You are an anomaly," AzeRoth said, and there was no judgment in the words, only statement of fact. "You should not exist. The frameworks of this cosmos have no place for what you are." Escanor met that alien gaze without flinching, though part of him, the part that still remembered being small and afraid, wanted to look away. "And yet," he replied, "I do exist. Perhaps your frameworks require revision." The Naru's light pulsed with something that might have been amusement or calculation or both. "Perhaps it agreed. "Or perhaps you simply need to be properly contained." The light intensified, and Escanor felt consciousness slipping away. His last thought before darkness claimed him was not of fear or anger, but of simple observation. He had survived the Fire Lord's wrath only to find something that considered him a problem, requiring solution. Above Hyjal, the wound in reality finally sealed shut. But its closing changed nothing. Escanor had arrived, and AzeRoth would never be quite the same. Consciousness returned in fragments. First came the awareness of light, not the warm radiance of the sun, but something colder, more clinical. It pressed against Escanor's closed eyelids with an insistence that felt almost aggressive, as if demanding he acknowledge its presence. He opened his eyes to find himself in a chamber that hurt to perceive. Everything was white. Not the white of snow or clouds, but an absolute absence of shadow that made depth impossible to judge. The walls, if they existed, blended seamlessly with the floor and ceiling. The only anchor to reality was his own body lying on a surface that felt solid despite being indistinguishable from the surrounding void. Escanor tried to sit up and failed. His limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. The weakness was familiar. In the worst way, it was the helplessness of his night form, when the sun's absence left him as fragile as spun glass. "You're awake?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the chamber without apparent source. "Good. We have much to discuss." The Naru materialized before him, its form more defined now in this space of its own making. AzeRoth's crystalline structure rotated slowly, each facet catching and refracting the omnipresent light in patterns that suggested meaning without conveying it. "Where am I?" Escanor's voice emerged thin and reedy, stripped of the commanding weight it carried during the day. He hated how small he sounded, how the question came out almost pleading. "Somewhere safe," Saratem replied. "For you, and more importantly, for others. I haven't hurt anyone." The protest felt weak even as he voiced it. The memory of the Firelands battle flickered through his mind, the casual way he'd matched Ragnaros blow for blow, the terrifying ease with which his presence had begun to unmake the Fire Lord's realm. Not yet. The Naru drifted closer, its light intensifying until Escanor had to squint against the glare. "But you will. You must understand you are not merely powerful. You are disruptive. Your very existence contradicts fundamental principles of this cosmos." Escanor forced himself to meet the entity's gaze, though every instinct screamed to look away. "I don't understand. What am I disrupting?" "Order." The word fell like a pronouncement. Every force in AzeRoth operates within established parameters. Fire burns, shadow corrupts, arcane transforms. Even the most chaotic powers follow predictable patterns. But you... The Naru's light pulsed with something that might have been frustration. You carry a sun inside you. Not a metaphor, not symbolic power. An actual stellar concept compressed into mortal flesh. It should be impossible. Yet here I stand. The words came out more defiant than Escanor intended, a ghost of his daytime pride bleeding through the night's timidity. "Here you lie," Saratem corrected not unkindly. "Weakened by darkness, vulnerable as any creature of flesh. This is when you are most honest, Escanor. When the power recedes, and you remember what you truly are, frightened, alone, and desperately seeking purpose." The accuracy of the observation stung worse than any physical blow. Escanor turned his face away, unable to maintain eye contact with that all-seeing radiance. "I can help you." The Naru continued, its tone shifting to something almost gentle. "The light I represent is order, purpose, righteousness made manifest. We could shape your power, give it direction. You would never have to fear your own strength again. You would become something greater than you ever imagined, a solar crusader wielding your anomalous nature in service of cosmic balance." For a moment the offer tempted him. How many years had he spent in 7 deadly sins, fearing noon's approach, dreading the person he became? When the sun reached its zenith, to have that power controlled, directed, made safe. But the image of Saratem's words crystallized in his mind, wielding his nature in service. Not mastering it, not accepting it, serving. "You want a weapon," Escanor said quietly. "Not a person. I want to prevent catastrophe." The gentleness evaporated from the Naru's tone. Left unchecked, you will draw attention from forces far more terrible than the Fire Lord. The void has already noticed you. I sensed their whispers the moment you arrived. The Titans will mark you as a threat to their ordering. Every power in this cosmos will either seek to possess you or destroy you, and the collateral damage of that conflict will be measured in worlds. "Then let me leave." Escanor tried again to rise, managed to prop himself on one elbow before exhaustion forced him back down. "Send me back wherever I came from. I never asked to be here. You cannot go back. The breach that brought you has sealed." Saratem's light dimmed slightly, and for the first time Escanor detected something like regret in its alien presence. "You are here, Escanor. That is immutable. The only question is whether you will accept guidance or force me to take more permanent measures." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but crystal clear. "I see." Escanor closed his eyes, suddenly very tired. "So, I'm a prisoner." "You are protected. From yourself and from those who would misuse you." The Naru began to drift backward, its form growing translucent. "Rest now. When you wake, we will begin the process of integration. You will learn to channel your power through the light to become something stable. Something safe. Wait, but the entity had already vanished, leaving Escanor alone in the featureless white void. He lay there for what felt like hours, tracking the invisible passage of time by the gradual weakening of his already diminished strength. Night form had always been his prison, but this was worse. At least before he'd known the sun would eventually return. Here in this place without sky or horizon, he had no such certainty. Fear crept in at the edges of his consciousness. Not the healthy caution of facing danger, but the deeper terror of losing himself entirely. If Saratem succeeded in integrating him, would he still be Escanor? Or would he become just another tool in the light's arsenal? His personality subsumed by purpose, he thought of Merlin of Meliodas, of the others he'd left behind in a world he could never return to. What would they think if they saw him now? Not proud or powerful, but cowering in an alien prison, too weak to even stand. Pathetic, he whispered to himself, and the word echoed in the empty space. You're pathetic. But even as self-loathing threatened to overwhelm him, a spark of something else kindled in his chest. Anger, yes, but more than that. Indignation. The dayform pride that never fully disappeared only lay dormant during darkness. He was Escanor Lyon's sin of pride. He had faced demon kings and survived. He had loved unrequitedly and carried on. He had spent decades learning to live with the curse of his own power, and he would not surrender that hard-won acceptance to become someone else's puppet. If the Naru wanted to control him, it would have to break him first. Time passed, minutes or hours impossible to tell. Escanor focused on his breathing, on maintaining consciousness despite the crushing fatigue. He couldn't fight like this, couldn't even properly think, but he could endure. Endurance was the one skill his night form had perfected over the years. Then so faint he almost missed it, a change in the light. It came from above, or what passed for above in this directionless space. A thin line of different luminance, warmer than the surrounding whiteness. Escanor's breath caught as he recognized what he was seeing. Sunlight. Real sunlight, bleeding through some imperfection in the chamber's construction. His body responded before his mind caught up. The transformation began in his core, a familiar burning sensation that spread outward through his limbs. Muscle replaced frailty. Confidence displaced fear. Within seconds he was sitting up, then standing his frame, expanding to its full imposing height. The chamber that had seemed infinite moments ago suddenly felt confining. Escanor looked around with eyes that now blazed with inner fire, assessing the space with tactical precision rather than helpless confusion. Interesting architecture, he observed, his voice restored to its proper depth, but ultimately flawed. He drew back one fist, channeling the solar heat that poured into him through that narrow gap. The chamber's white walls had seemed indestructible, but they had not been designed to withstand the focused fury of a living sun. His strike connected. The entire structure shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from the impact point, the pristine whiteness fracturing into a mosaic of breaking light. Alarms, if they could be called that, resonated through dimensions Escanor couldn't name, the cosmic equivalent of guards rushing toward a prison break. You have made a poor decision. Saratem's voice echoed through the disintegrating chamber. Without the light's guidance, you will not survive what comes for you. Perhaps? Escanor struck again, and this time the wall gave way entirely. Beyond it lay not more chamber, but open sky. Actual sky with clouds and distance and blessed, beautiful sun. But at least I will face it as myself. He stepped through the breach, and the chamber's remains collapsed behind him in a cascade of dissolving light. For a moment he hung suspended in the air, borne up by nothing but the sheer force of his presence. Below he could see AzeRoth's surface stretching to the horizon, a patchwork of forests and mountains and seas. Somewhere down there forces were already moving. The Naru would not simply let him go. The Fire Lord still seethed with wounded pride. And according to Sarah Tem, worse things had already taken notice. But for this one perfect moment, Escanor was free. He began to descend, choosing a direction more by instinct than logic. The land below looked peaceful from this height, almost serene. He knew it wouldn't remain that way. His presence would draw conflict like moths to flame. But he had learned long ago that peace bought through submission was no peace at all. Better to stand proud and face the consequences than to kneel safely in chains. The ground rushed up to meet him, and Escanor landed with an impact that sent tremors through the earth. He straightened, dusted off his shoulders with habitual precision, and surveyed his surroundings. Forest, dense and primal, stretched in all directions. Good. Trees meant shadow, and shadow meant places to hide when night inevitably came. He had just begun to orient himself when the whispers started. They came not through his ears, but directly into his mind, bypassing normal sensation entirely. The voice was feminine, ancient, and carried an undercurrent of amusement that made his skin crawl. Free at last, it purred. How delicious, how predictable, how utterly perfect. Escanor spun, searching for the source, but saw nothing. Only trees and shadow and the dancing interplay of light between branches. "Who's there?" he demanded, power crackling around his clenched fists. "A friend," the voice promised. Or perhaps an enemy. Such distinctions matter so little in the end. What matters, beautiful sun-bearer, is that you are precisely what I have been waiting for. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, and Escanor felt something watching him, with hunger that transcended physical need. This was not the light's cold calculation or the Fire Lord's straightforward rage. This was something older, more patient, and infinitely more dangerous. "The light wanted to cage you," the voice continued. "How boring. I want to liberate you, to help you understand what you truly are, and what you could become if you simply let go." "Show yourself," Escanor growled, but the voice only laughed, a sound like silk sliding over razors. "In time. For now know this, they will all come for you. Light, fire, order, chaos, every force in this cosmos will try to claim or destroy you. But I offer a third path. I offer the truth they're all too afraid to speak, which is that you don't belong here, that you never will. That fighting to exist in a world that rejects your very nature is the slowest, cruelest suicide imaginable." A pause heavy with implication, unless you learn to reject it back. The presence faded, leaving only normal shadows and the rustle of wind through leaves. But Escanor could still feel it watching, waiting, patient as stone. He stood alone in this forest, stronger than he'd been in the White Chamber, but suddenly more uncertain than ever. The Naru's prison had been obvious, its bars visible. But these new chains, woven from doubt and temptation, were far more subtle, and he had the terrible suspicion they would be far harder to break. Above, the sun continued its arc across the sky, oblivious to the cosmic drama unfolding in its name. Escanor tilted his face toward its warmth, drawing what comfort he could from the familiar sensation. Hours remained before nightfall. Hours to decide what kind of man he wanted to be in this strange new world. Hours before the real hunt began. The forest offered no sanctuary. Escanor had learned this truth within the first hour of his escape, as the land itself seemed to reject his presence. Trees wilted where he stood too long, their leaves browning and curling despite the vitality of spring. Small animals fled at his approach, driven by instincts that recognized something fundamentally wrong in his existence. He walked without destination, aware only that remaining stationary invited capture. The sun tracked its path overhead, and with each degree of its ascent, power flooded his frame more completely. By noon, he would be unstoppable. Until then, he remained merely formidable, a distinction that might prove fatal. The whispers had not returned, but their absence felt tactical rather than permanent. Something in the darkness between trees continued to observe him, patient and hungry. A sound made him pause. Not the rustle of wind or wildlife, but something rhythmic and deliberate. Footsteps, though none touched the ground. Escanor turned slowly, cataloging his surroundings with the tactical awareness his day form granted. The air 20 paces ahead shimmered like heat rising from stone. Then it split, peeling back to reveal a figure that made reality itself seem to flinch. The woman, if such a term applied, stood wrapped in tattered robes that might once have been white, but now bore stains in colors that hurt to perceive directly. Her face shifted between beautiful and terrible, with each passing second never settling on either. But it was her eyes that commanded attention, pupils darker than mere black, as if they opened onto voids that preceded creation itself. Xal'atath. The name emerged from Escanor's lips unbidden, pulled from knowledge he didn't remember possessing. His enhanced awareness during daylight hours sometimes revealed truths hidden from normal perception, and this entity's nature screamed across dimensions with undeniable clarity. So, you do know me. The void entity smiled, and the expression held genuine delight. Or perhaps you simply recognize kinship when you see it. We are both things that shouldn't exist, you and I. Both impossibilities given form. We are nothing alike. Escanor's hands clenched at his sides, solar heat beginning to shimmer around his knuckles. I am a man. You are corruption wearing flesh as costume. Such confidence in your identity. Xal'atath circled him slowly, her movement creating ripples in space that left brief after images of horror. Tell me when the sun sets and you become small and afraid. Again, do you still believe that? Or do you lie awake wondering which version is the lie, the powerful lord or the frightened child? The words struck closer to truth than Escanor wanted to acknowledge. He had spent decades grappling with precisely that question, never finding an answer that satisfied both aspects of his nature. My struggle is my own, he said, forcing his voice to remain level. Whatever you're offering, I refuse it. I offer nothing. Xal'atath replied, stopping directly before him. At this distance, he could see shapes moving in those void-like pupils, entire realities being born and dying in endless succession. I merely observe. You fear your own strength, Escanor. Fear what you become when power fills you completely. That terror is the crack through which doubt seeps, and doubt is the gateway to wisdom. Or madness, often the same thing. She raised one hand not threateningly, but as if to touch his face. Escanor jerked backward, and her smile widened. See, even now at the height of your power, you flinch. Because deep down, you know the truth they all avoid saying. You don't belong here. This world has no place for a walking sun. You are the anomaly, the error in the cosmic code. And errors. She let the sentence hang unfinished, the implication clear. Before Escanor could respond, thunder split the sky. Not natural thunder. This carried harmonics that spoke of ancient machinery and imposed order. The clouds above them twisted into a vortex, and from its center descended a pillar of golden lightning that struck the ground between them. The impact sent Xal'atath stumbling backward, her form flickering with barely contained rage. When the light faded, a figure stood where none had been before. Odin, Highkeeper of the Titan forged, manifested in armor that seemed carved from solidified storm. His single eye blazed with electric fury as it fixed on Escanor, categorizing and judging in the same instant. Anomaly. The word reverberated with the force of absolute authority. By order of the Pantheon's design, you are to be contained until proper assessment can be completed. Surrender peacefully or what? Escanor's voice cut through the pronouncement with casual dismissal. You'll strike me down, join the queue. It seems everyone in this realm has opinions about what I should or shouldn't do. Odin's expression darkened. Your arrogance is noted. It will not save you. My arrogance, Escanor replied, brushing a speck of ash from his shoulder with deliberate nonchalance. "Is the only honest thing about me. At least I make no pretense of knowing what's best for others." Lightning coiled around Odin's form, building toward release. But before violence could erupt, another presence made itself known. This one arrived without drama or announcement, simply appearing as if it had always been there and they had only just noticed. Rodin, the Watcher of Storms, stood with hands clasped behind his back. Where Odin radiated barely contained aggression, Raiden projected something closer to philosophical curiosity. His gaze upon Escanor held neither hostility nor welcome-only assessment. "Interesting," Raiden murmured, his voice carrying undertones of distant thunder. "Odin, perhaps restraint would serve better than force in this instance." "The anomaly must be secured," Odin growled. "Every moment it remains free risks. Risks revealing how little we truly understand about creation's boundaries." Raiden interrupted smoothly. "Look at him, brother. Not with anger, but with perception. He radiates stellar heat without flame. He exists outside our carefully catalogued hierarchies of power. Destroying such a unique phenomenon before study would be wasteful." Escanor found himself caught in a triangle of cosmic attention. Void to one side, Titans to the others, each with their own agenda for his future. The forest around them had fallen absolutely silent, as if nature itself held its breath. "I am not a phenomenon," he said, his tone hardening. "I am not an anomaly to be catalogued, or a weapon to be seized, or a corruption to be studied. I am Escanor. That should be sufficient. But it isn't." Salatath's voice emerged from the shadows, where she'd retreated dripping with false sympathy. "Because you exist in their world now, and they cannot tolerate mysteries. They must name, categorize, control. It's what order does. It reduces the infinite to manageable boxes. Silence, void spawn." Odin's lightning flared brighter. "Your manipulations are transparent, are they?" Salatath laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I speak only truth." "You want to cage him?" The light wanted the same. Even his own nature cages him, cycling between strength and weakness with the sun's passage. He is a prisoner from every angle. And the only question is which jailer he chooses. Or, Escanor said quietly, power beginning to build around his frame, "I choose none of you." The heat intensified. Not gradually, but in a sudden surge that made the air scream. The grass beneath his feet didn't wither. It ignited, burning with flames that paradoxically released no smoke. Odin's lightning bent away from him, as if repelled by a greater force. Even Salatath's shadows recoiled. "You want to contain me?" Escanor's voice remained level, but something in its depths promised violence. "You want to study me, use me. Let me make one thing absolutely clear. I bow to no one. Not light, not fire, not order, not void. The sun requires no permission to shine." He moved then, not attacking, but simply departing, leaping upward with force that cratered the earth where he'd stood. The Titan's reflexes were legendary, but Escanor's action came without warning or telegraph. By the time Odin's lightning struck, he was already gone, a streak of gold against the sky. Raiden watched him disappear with expression unchanged. Fascinating. He chose flight over fight. There's wisdom in him beneath the pride. "There's danger," Odin corrected, turning his gaze skyward. "We must inform the keepers. If one anomaly can pierce reality's veil, others may follow." Behind them, Salatath's form dissolved into shadow, but her voice lingered a moment longer. "Let him run. Fear will do my work better than any whisper. He's learning that nowhere in this cosmos wants him. Eventually he'll realize the only refuge is embrace of what he truly is, an ending wrapped in light." Then she too was gone, leaving only normal forest sounds and the scorched circle where Escanor had stood. The land below blurred into abstraction as Escanor pushed himself faster, higher, farther. He had no destination, only desperate need for distance between himself and the convergence of forces. His power sustained the flight, but he could feel each expenditure like debt accumulating. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward evening, and with each degree lost, Escanor felt his strength bleeding away proportionally. The landscape beneath him had changed mountains, giving way to gentler hills, harsh stone replaced by rolling green. Then he saw it, a land that seemed to exhale tranquility. Mist clung to valleys like comfortable blankets. Pagoda roofs broke through the fog in artful arrangements. Even from this height, he could sense something different about this place. Not hostile rejection, but patient observation. Pandaria. Though he'd never heard the name, knowledge whispered at the edges of his awareness. The land of balance, where chaos and order met in eternal negotiation rather than war. His flight faltered as exhaustion finally caught up with exertion. Escanor descended less gracefully than intended, landing heavily in a bamboo grove that groaned under the impact. He staggered, caught himself against a tree that bowed but didn't break, and felt his transformation accelerating as dusk approached. The weakness came like water through a breaking dam. Muscle deflated, height decreased, confidence evaporated. Within moments, he was once again the small, frightened man who had awakened in the druid's care. The contrast felt more cruel than ever. He'd been a god in flight and now could barely stand. Footsteps approached through the bamboo. Slow, measured, carrying no threat, but also no fear. Escanor wanted to run, but lacked the strength. He could only watch as a figure emerged from the mist. The Pandaren monk was old. His white furs shot through with silver, his eyes holding the kind of depth that came from decades of observation rather than action. He regarded Escanor without surprise, as if he'd been expecting exactly this arrival. "You carry great heat." The monk said, his voice like water over stones, gentle but inexorable. But also great cold. Two truths fighting for dominance. "Please," Escanor managed, hating how his voice cracked. "I don't want trouble. I just need somewhere to rest until morning." Morning solves nothing if evening remains unresolved. The monk stepped closer, and Escanor tensed despite knowing he was helpless. But the Pandaren made no threatening move, only studied him with those ancient eyes. "You fear the night, but more you fear what the day makes you. Am I wrong?" The accuracy of the observations brought tears Escanor couldn't suppress. "Everyone wants something from me. Light wants a weapon. Void wants corruption. Titans want a specimen. I don't know how to be what any of them need. I don't know how to be anything but this broken thing that changes with the sun." "Perhaps," the monk said gently, "you are not broken. Perhaps you simply fear being whole." He gestured toward a path that wound deeper into the bamboo. Lanterns floated along it without visible support, their light warm and inviting. "Come. You need rest, and Pandaria has learned patience with troubled souls. Here the mist hides many things, including those who wish to hide themselves." Escanor hesitated, waiting for the trap, the condition, the price. But the monk simply waited, patient, as stone offering nothing but shelter from the gathering dark. Finally, lacking alternatives and exhausted beyond resistance, Escanor followed. The path led to a small monastery built into the hillside, its architecture designed to complement rather than dominate the landscape. Other Pandaren moved about evening routines, their movements fluid and unhurried. A few glanced at Escanor with mild curiosity, but no fear or hostility. The monk led him to the simple room with sleeping mat, water basin, and window overlooking the valley. "Nothing more, nothing less. Sleep," the monk instructed. "Tomorrow, if you wish, we can speak of what troubles you, or we can sit in silence. Pandaria accepts both." "Why help me?" Escanor asked the question, emerging before he could stop it. "You don't know me. Don't know what I am." "I know you are tired," the monk replied, and his smile held understanding without judgment. "Everything else can wait until you have rested." He departed, sliding the door closed with a soft click. Escanor stood alone in the room, waiting for betrayal that didn't come. Eventually, exhaustion overcame paranoia. He collapsed onto the sleeping mat and was unconscious within moments. Outside, the old monk paused at the threshold. Another Pandaren approached, younger and bearing the marks of a warrior rather than contemplative. "Master Chen, is it wise to harbor such an unusual guest?" I felt his arrival like earthquake. Chen Stormstout, for that was indeed. His name gazed up at the stars, beginning to emerge through evening's veil. "The young sun-bearer is being hunted by forces that could shatter mountains in their conflict," he said quietly. "What's one old monk and a few students against such powers? Nothing." "Then why risk it?" Chen's smile returned, tinged with something that might have been memory. "Because sometimes nothing is the only thing that can stand between impossibility and tragedy. And because long ago a different lost soul taught me that every creature deserves at least one night of peace before facing their destiny." He turned away from the stars back toward the monastery's heart. "Besides," he added, "I'm curious what sunrise will bring. It's been some time since I've witnessed something truly new in this old world." In his room, Escanor slept dreamlessly, unaware that while Pandaria offered temporary sanctuary, the forces seeking him had only begun to mobilize. The light was sending hunters. The void was weaving schemes. The Titans were consulting ancient protocols, and somewhere in the space between spaces, something vast and terrible stirred at the whisper of a sun that did not belong. But for one night at least, these troubles could wait. For one night, Escanor was simply a tired man in a quiet room, and that was enough. Dawn broke over Pandaria like a promise kept. Escanor woke to find himself transformed once more, the familiar surge of strength restoring what night had stolen. He sat up on the sleeping mat, feeling the power coil through his limbs like liquid fire, and for the first time since arriving in this world, he allowed himself a moment of simple gratitude. The monastery remained quiet, its inhabitants moving through morning rituals with practiced grace. Through the window, he could see mist rising from the valleys in slow spirals, catching sunlight and turning it golden. The peace felt fragile, too delicate to last, but he was learning to accept what each moment offered. A soft knock at the door preceded Chen's entrance. The old Pandaren carried a tray bearing tea and rice, simple fare that somehow felt more welcoming than any feast. "You look better," Chen observed, setting the tray down. "The night treated you kindly." "Your hospitality treated me kindly?" Escanor corrected, his voice restored to its commanding depth. He paused, then added with uncharacteristic humility, "Thank you. I am unused to receiving aid without expectation of payment. The only payment Pandaria asks is honest presence." Chen poured tea with movements refined by decades of repetition. "You are troubled by more than pursuit, I think. The fire inside you burns both ways, warming and consuming." Escanor accepted the tea, holding the cup carefully, despite his size. "You speak as if you understand." "I understand balance." Chen settled into a sitting position that looked effortless despite his age. "All Pandaren do. We have lived with shy emotions given physical form for generations. We learn that denying what we feel only strengthens it. The same principle applies to power, I suspect. My power isn't emotion. It's simply what I am." "Is it?" Chen's eyes held gentle challenge. "Or is it what you become when you stop fearing judgment?" The question hung between them, too pointed to ignore. Escanor found himself considering it seriously, examining the relationship between his confidence and the sun's position. Was his pride genuinely his own, or merely power's side effect? Before he could formulate an answer, the light changed. It happened without warning or transition. One moment sunlight streamed through the window in warm abundance. The next, it dimmed as if passing through smoke. But there was no smoke. No cloud, nothing visible to explain the sudden reduction. Escanor stood abruptly, the tea forgotten. Through the window he saw other monks, looking skyward with expressions of confusion. The sky remained blue, the sun still present, but its radiance had diminished to something closer to late afternoon than morning. What's happening? Chen moved to join him, and for the first time, Escanor heard uncertainty in the old Pandaaran's voice. The answer came not from either of them, but from the sky itself. A shadow fell across the sun. Not the gradual encroachment of an eclipse, but an instantaneous dimming as something vast positioned itself between the celestial body and AzeRoth's surface. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Plants that had been reaching toward morning light began to curl inward, confused by the sudden withdrawal of sustenance, and Escanor felt his power bleeding away. The transformation reversed mid-morning, his frame shrinking as muscle gave way to frailty. He gasped, stumbling against the window frame as weakness crashed through him like a wave. This wasn't the natural cycle of day becoming night. This was amputation, the sun being torn away while it should have been at its strongest. No, he whispered, horror replacing the confidence of moments before. No, this isn't possible. But it was happening. His daylight form fled like water through grasping fingers, leaving him small and afraid, while the sun still hung in the sky. The paradox of it threatened to break his mind. He could see the light, but couldn't touch it, couldn't draw from it. Chen caught him before he collapsed completely. What's wrong? Tell me what you need. The sun? Escanor managed, his voice thin as paper. Something's blocking it, stealing it. I can't reach. Thunder rolled across the sky, but this was no natural storm. The sound carried frequencies that made reality shudder, harmonics that spoke of hunger and intent. Escanor recognized the timbre on an instinctive level that bypassed reason. Something was eating the sun. The monastery's inhabitants had gathered in the courtyard, all staring upward at the impossible sight. The shadow covering the sun wasn't solid. It shifted and writhed like living smoke, semi-transparent enough to let some light through, but dense enough to steal its warmth and power. Through that darkness, shapes began to emerge. Not physical forms exactly, but suggestions of geometry that hurt to perceive. Angles that bent wrong, surfaces that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. And at the center of this visual assault, a presence coalesced. AzeRoth manifested between world and sun like a tumor growing in reality's flesh. The entity defied easy description. Its form was part shadow, part absence, part nightmare given substance. Where it existed, space itself seemed to hollow out, creating voids that the eye tried desperately to fill with something comprehensible. But comprehension failed before this thing, this wrongness that proclaimed itself through mere presence. When it spoke, the words bypassed sound entirely, resonating directly in the minds of all who witnessed. I am hunger that consumes light. I am the final darkness that waits beyond stellar death. I am AzeRoth, and I have come for what does not belong. The declaration rolled across Pandaria like physical force. Monks fell to their knees, hands pressed against temples as the psychic weight crushed down. Even Chen, disciplined by decades of meditation, staggered under the onslaught. Only Escanor remained standing, though he swayed with weakness. Recognition flared through the terror. This thing knew him. Had come specifically for him. What do you want? He called out, hating how his voice quavered. Why are you doing this? You carry stellar essence in mortal flesh. An abomination. A paradox that offends the fundamental laws of entropy. AzeRoth's presence intensified, and more light drained from the sun. I exist to correct such errors, to consume anomalous radiance and return it to proper void. The temperature continued dropping. Frost began forming on bamboo leaves despite it being spring. The unnatural cold bit through Escanor's thin night-form defenses, and he found himself shaking, whether from chill or terror he couldn't say. I'm just a man. He tried the protest, emerging weak even to his own ears. I didn't ask for this power. I don't want. What you want is irrelevant. The entity shifted and portions of its impossible anatomy moved through dimensions Escanor couldn't name. You are Sunbearer, Sun Thief. You have stolen what belongs to the void between stars, and I will reclaim it. Tendrils of living darkness extended from AzeRoth's form, reaching down toward Pandaria. Where they touched, color drained from the world. Green bamboo turned gray, then black, then simply ceased to exist, leaving behind spaces that refused to hold shape. The monks scattered, but not quickly enough. One tendril brushed a young Pandaran's shoulder, and he screamed, not in pain, but in the sudden understanding of absolute emptiness. His companions dragged him away, but Escanor could see the mark where darkness had touched a patch of fur that no longer reflected light, that seemed to absorb and nullify any illumination that fell upon it. Stop! Escanor lurched forward, though he knew the gesture was futile. Leave them alone. Your argument is with me, not them. They harbor you. They provide sanctuary to that which should not be. AzeRoth's attention fixed more fully on the monastery, and Escanor felt the weight of that regard like gravity increasing. They have chosen. They will share your fate. Chen moved to stand beside Escanor despite the obvious danger. If you want him, monster, you'll have to go through all of us. Other monks echoed the sentiment, forming a protective circle despite their terror. The gesture stunned Escanor. These people barely knew him, had no reason to risk themselves, yet stood firm against cosmic horror because it was the right thing to do. Fools, he whispered. But the word carried more admiration than criticism. AzeRoth's equivalent of laughter vibrated through their minds. Not sound, but the sensation of stars dying in distant galaxies of heat bleeding away into eternal cold. Mortality's courage is always touching and always futile. The Sun-Eater's form expanded its impossible geometry, spreading across more of the sky. The temperature plummeted further. Ice crept across the monastery's roofs in crystalline patterns that looked almost beautiful if one didn't understand they represented advancing annihilation. Escanor felt his consciousness beginning to fray. Without the sun's power, his night form lacked even basic resilience. The cold, the fear, the sheer wrongness of AzeRoth's presence, all of it pressed against his mind like a vice slowly tightening. He thought of Merlin, of the others he'd left behind. Wondered if they would ever know what happened to him. If anyone would remember the lion's sin of pride. Or if his story would simply end here, erased by darkness that preceded and outlasted all light. Then something changed, high above beyond AzeRoth's shadow. Beyond even the obscured sun power stirred. Not one source, but multiple light order, even traces of fel and arcane converging on this single point in space and time. The cosmic forces that had been pursuing Escanor individually suddenly found common cause. The sky split open. A beam of pure radiance crashed down from the heavens, striking AzeRoth's form with enough force to make the entity recoil. The beam wasn't singular, but composite golden light woven with azure order, stabilized by geometric patterns of Titan design. Saratam's voice echoed across dimensions. Cease! This world is under cosmic protection. Your predation violates treaty. AzeRoth writhed under the assault, its form flickering between states of matter and antimatter. The Sunbearer is mine, by right of entropy. He carries what should have died with his original universe. He is refugee, not resource. Raden's presence joined the light, adding storm-charged authority to the defense. The Pantheon has declared him subject to assessment, not consumption. Your declarations mean nothing to Void. But AzeRoth was retreating, its shadow pulling back from the sun. I will return. Entropy always returns. And when I do, no force in this cosmos will stand between me and my prey. The entity began to dissolve, but not before its attention turned one final time to Escanor. Run, Sunbearer. Hide in whatever shadow accepts you. It changes nothing. I have tasted your essence now. I know your frequency. Across dimensions and through time itself I will find you. And when I do, I will consume not just your power, but the very memory of light that birthed it. Then it was gone, leaving only residual cold and the slowly warming sun. Light returned in a rush. Escanor felt his transformation begin again, power flooding back into his frame. But this time the surge brought no relief, only sick certainty that his respite had ended. AzeRoth had marked him in ways he didn't fully understand, but knew were permanent. Above Saratem and Raden hovered in tenuous alliance, their attention focused on where the void entity had vanished. This changes the calculus, Raden said, his voice carrying to those below despite the distance. A herald of the Void Lords, actively hunting him. We cannot capture him either. Saratem's tone held grudging acceptance. You witnessed his power when properly sustained. Attempting to cage him while a Void Herald pursues would only create a stationary target. We would lose him, and potentially AzeRoth itself, to AzeRoth's hunger. Then what do you propose? The Naru's light pulsed with what might have been frustration. We watch. We protect the barriers between realms. And we prepare for the day when the Sun-Bearer must choose which side of the cosmic war he will fight upon. They departed, their presences fading like stars at dawn. In the monastery courtyard, Escanor stood restored to full height and power. But his expression held none of its usual confidence. Around him, monks tended to their injured companion, the one whose shoulder had been touched by void. The mark remained a patch of absolute darkness that defied healing. Chen approached slowly, his usual calm shaken, but not broken. You bring great danger, Sun-Bearer. I know. Escanor's hands clenched into fists. I should leave. Find somewhere far from civilization where these battles won't endanger innocents. Perhaps. Chen studied him with those ancient eyes. Or perhaps you should stop running and start understanding. You saw how the cosmic forces responded. Even those who would control you, they defended you. Why? Because I'm useful, a weapon worth protecting. Or, Chen said gently, because even they recognize that some things transcend politics and power struggles. That herald of void, it wanted to unmake you, not because of what you could become, but because of what you are. An existence that proves entropy doesn't have the final word. Escanor looked at his hands, feeling the solar heat radiating from his skin. I don't understand what I am. How can I fight what I don't comprehend? Then perhaps it's time you learned. Chen gestured toward the monastery's meditation hall. Pandaria has techniques for understanding one's true nature. Methods that require neither strength nor weakness, only honest examination. I'm being hunted by forces that could crack planets. I don't have time for meditation. You don't have time not to. Chen's expression turned stern, and for a moment Escanor glimpsed the warrior beneath the contemplative exterior. That creature will return Sun-Bearer, and when it does, raw power won't save you. You need to understand the relationship between yourself and the force you carry. Not domination, not submission, integration. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Integration. Not so different from what Saratem had offered, but without the cage. A voluntary examination of self rather than imposed control. How long would this take? As long as necessary. Could be hours, could be days. Chen's smile returned tinged with knowing humor. But I suspect for someone carrying a sun inside them, time operates differently than for most. Escanor wanted to refuse to insist he needed to keep moving. But exhaustion, not physical, but spiritual, weighed on him. The constant flight, the endless confrontations, the parade of forces demanding pieces of his identity. All of it had worn him down to something brittle. One day, he said finally, I'll give you one day. If your methods show promise, I'll consider more. Fair enough. Chen turned toward the meditation hall. Come, let's see if we can teach a lion to sit still long enough to understand his own roar. They walked together across the courtyard, leaving behind the scorched marks and void-touched stone. Other monks watched them go, their expressions mixing fear and hope in equal measure. Above, the sun resumed its normal journey across the sky, warm and constant. But Escanor could feel the difference now. A subtle wrongness in the light, as if AzeRoth's presence had left a stain that wouldn't fade. The entity had touched his connection to stellar power, marked it in ways that made his skin crawl. The herald would return. This had been reconnaissance, not true assault. Next time AzeRoth would come prepared. Escanor needed to be ready. Not just stronger, he'd been strong enough to fight a Fire Lord. He needed to be smarter, more integrated with his power rather than merely wielding it. Chen led him into the meditation hall, a circular space dominated by a pool of still water that perfectly reflected the sky above. Candles burned at the cardinal points, their flames unnaturally steady, despite lack of breeze. Sit, Chen instructed, settling into position on one side of the pool. And look. Escanor sat across from him, feeling awkward and oversized in this space designed for contemplation rather than combat. He looked at the water's surface as instructed, seeing his own reflection staring back, proud, powerful, and despite everything afraid. What am I supposed to see? Right now, only what you show yourself. Chen closed his eyes, his breathing slowing to barely perceptible rhythm. But in time, perhaps you'll see what the sun sees when it looks back at you. Escanor stared at his reflection, at the face that was and wasn't his own. Behind it, he could see the sky reflected blue and infinite, holding mysteries that dwarfed his personal struggles. Somewhere in the void, between stars, AzeRoth prepared for its return. Somewhere in distant realms, cosmic forces plotted and schemed. But here in this quiet hall, Escanor began the hardest journey of all. The journey inward, where no pride could mask truth and no power could provide escape. He took a breath, steadied himself, and began to look. The water's surface held no answers, only questions reflected back in endless recursion. Escanor stared at his own face until it became foreign. A stranger wearing his features like an ill-fitting mask. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time lost meaning, in the meditation hall's stillness. Chen's voice emerged from the silence like a stone breaking water. Tell me about the first time. The first time what? The first time the sun changed you. When did you learn what you were? Escanor's jaw tightened, old wounds reopening at the memory. I was a child. 10, maybe 11. My brother he enjoyed making me feel small. One day he pushed too far and I pushed back. He paused, the words catching in his throat. When the sun hit me, I broke his arm without meaning to. They all looked at me like I was a monster. My own parents tried to kill me. Because you were dangerous. Because I was different. The distinction mattered, though Escanor had never articulated it before. They could have helped me learn control. Instead, they chose fear. And you internalized that fear. Chen's eyes remained closed, but his attention felt absolute. You began to believe what they saw, that your power made you monstrous. So you split yourself in two. The weak, acceptable version that apologized for existing, and the strong, defiant version that refused to apologize for anything. It's not that simple. It never is. But it's a beginning. Chen shifted slightly, his voice taking on a different quality. Now tell me, which version is the lie? The question struck like a physical blow. Escanor opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. Which was the lie? The frightened man who cowered at night, or the arrogant lord who strode through daylight hours? Or were they both lies, masks covering something deeper he'd never allowed himself to examine? I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty hurt. Good. Uncertainty is the first step toward truth. Chen finally opened his eyes, and they held something like approval. Look at your reflection again. Not at the face, but through it. What do you see beneath? Escanor turned his gaze back to the pool. At first, nothing changed. Still his own features, still the stranger, wearing his skin. But as he stared, letting his vision unfocus slightly, something shifted. The reflection began to waver as if heated from below. His face remained, but behind it, within it, light moved. Not the external radiance of the sun, but something intrinsic. A core of stellar heat that pulsed with its own rhythm, independent of day or night. I see. He struggled for words. Fire, but not burning. Just existing. The sun doesn't burn, Escanor. It simply is. Hydrogen becomes helium mass, converts to energy, and existence continues without judgment or apology. Chen leaned forward slightly. Your power isn't something you wear or wield. It's what you are when you stop pretending to be anything else. But I change. Night makes me weak, day makes me strong. That's not choosing, that's being controlled. Is it? Chen's smile held challenge. Or is it permission? Night gives you permission to be vulnerable. Day gives you permission to be powerful. But the sun at noon gives you permission to be complete. The words resonated through Escanor's chest like a struck bell. Complete. Not strong or weak, proud or humble, but whole. The one that state he reached at solar zenith, when power peaked and certainty became absolute, wasn't just his strongest form. It was the moment when all his fractured pieces aligned. I'm afraid of it, he whispered. The one. When I reach that state, I become something I don't recognize. Something that feels no doubt, no fear, no humanity. Because humanity in your understanding requires weakness to balance strength. Chen stood, moving to stand beside the pool. But what if that's wrong? What if humanity is the integration of all aspects, not the denial of any? Before Escanor could respond, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but instantly, a plunge from comfortable warmth to biting cold that made breath visible. The candles flickered despite their unnatural steadiness, and frost crept across the meditation hall's wooden floor in spiraling patterns. Chen's expression hardened. It's back. They rushed outside to find the sky darkening once more. But this time AzeRoth didn't simply shadow the sun. The entity was consuming it, wrapping tendrils of void around the celestial body in a grotesque embrace. Light bled away, not by degrees, but in chunks, as if reality itself was being excised piece by piece. Escanor felt his power draining again, the transformation reversing. But something was different this time. The meditation, incomplete though it was, had shifted something fundamental. He could feel the connection now, not just to external sunlight, but to the core of stellar heat within himself. It wasn't enough to stop the change, but it slowed it. Made him aware of each piece of strength that fled. AzeRoth's presence descended like a collapsing mountain. The entity had grown since their last encounter. Fed perhaps by the taste of Escanor's essence, it had stolen. Its form now dominated half the visible sky. Impossible geometry spreading like infection. You ran. I found you. You hid. I marked you. The words bypassed sound, driving directly into consciousness with the force of absolute certainty. Now I claim what was always mine, the light you stole from entropy's embrace. Around the monastery, Pandaren monks mobilized. But their weapons and techniques honed against mortal threats and Shah manifestations meant nothing against this cosmic predator. They were ants confronting avalanche capable of witnessing but not preventing. Chen stood beside Escanor, staff in hand, despite the futility. We stand with you. No. Escanor's voice emerged, strained but determined. You've done enough. This fight isn't yours. You're wrong. Chen planted his staff firmly. Every fight against entropy is everyone's fight. That thing wants to unmake existence itself. Refusing to oppose it would be refusing to exist. The old Pandaren certainty struck something deep in Escanor's chest. Here was someone who understood, not just intellectually, but in his bones, that some things required standing against regardless of outcome. "Then stand behind me," Escanor said, feeling resolve crystallize. "Because I'm done running." AzeRoth's attention focused fully upon him, and the weight of that regard nearly drove him to his knees. But he held teeth-gritted body, shaking with effort, but refusing to fall. Defiance is meaningless. You weaken by the moment. Soon you will be nothing but meat and memory, and I will consume both. Maybe? Escanor took a step forward, then another. Each movement cost him strength he couldn't spare, but he pushed onward. Or maybe you've made a mistake. You think the sun is something outside me, something you can block or steal. But Chen taught me something in that hall, something I should have understood years ago. He stopped planting his feet. Above the last sliver of visible sun disappeared behind AzeRoth's form. Darkness fell complete, and with it, Escanor's transformation finished. He stood in his night form, small and frail, barely more than human baseline. But he was smiling. "The sun isn't what gives me power," he said, voice thin but steady. "I am the sun. And you can't consume me because I finally stopped trying to consume myself." He closed his eyes, reaching inward with a certainty he'd never possessed before. The meditation had shown him the way, not to the external source of stellar radiation, but to the internal truth of what he was. The core that existed independent of cycle or circumstance. And he touched it. Heat erupted from within, not borrowed from distant stars, but generated by his own fundamental nature. This wasn't transformation in the traditional sense, no muscle swelling or height increasing. Instead, Escanor's form simply refined, became more itself. The weak frame remained, but it blazed with intensity that transcended physical power. AzeRoth recoiled. "Impossible! You have no source! I have blocked!" "You've blocked nothing." Escanor opened his eyes, and they burned with light that had no external origin. "I don't need permission from the sky to be what I am. I am the concept of sun-given flesh. And concepts don't die just because you refuse to perceive them. The power built not in waves, but as continuous escalation. Noon approached true noon, the moment of perfect solar alignment, regardless of whether any sun was visible. And Escanor had finally learned to access that state without external validation. The One emerged. But this wasn't the blind arrogance that had characterized his peak power before. This was conscious, controlled, chosen. Escanor grew yes-frame, expanding presence, intensifying, but he remained aware throughout. Felt each increment of change, understood each shift in capability. When the transformation completed, he stood not as two people sharing a body, but as one being finally integrated. Who decided? The one said, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality vibrate, that I required a sun in the sky to be radiant. He moved, and movement became attack. Not a punch or kick, but pure presence expressing will. The space between him and AzeRoth simply ceased to matter. He was there, and then here distance rendered meaningless by absolute certainty of location. His hand touched the void herald's form, and where contact occurred, darkness burned, not with fire or light in the conventional sense, but with existence itself. AzeRoth represented entropy, the heat death of reality, the final silence. The One represented the opposite, not creation exactly, but being. The stubborn insistence that something was better than nothing, that heat was superior to cold, that existence trumped void. These two fundamental forces met, and the cosmos itself shuddered at their collision. "Impossible!" AzeRoth shrieked, its confidence fracturing for the first time. "You cannot burn void. Nothing burns void. It is the absence that remains when everything else is consumed. Then I am the presence that remains when nothing else does." The One's voice held no mockery, no pride in the traditional sense. only statement of fundamental truth. You are powerful, Herald. Perhaps the most powerful thing I've faced. But you made one critical error. His grip tightened on the entity's substance, and more darkness evaporated under his touch. You assumed I was fuel to be consumed. But I'm not burning myself up. I'm just burning. This is what I am. And I will continue being it long after you finished failing to unmake me. AzeRoth thrashed its impossible form, contorting through dimensions in desperate attempt to escape. Tendrils lashed out, each one capable of unmaking matter at the atomic level. They struck the one's body, his face, his chest, and achieved nothing. Where void touched Sunbearer, it didn't consume. It evaporated. Simply ceased to function, as if the laws governing its existence had been politely but firmly declined. No. This defies what your understanding good. The one pulled in AzeRoth's form began to compress. Let me teach you something, Herald. Entropy says everything tends toward disorder, toward cold, toward silence. But before entropy, there was nothing. And something emerged from that nothing. Something chose to be despite having no reason or right to exist. He compressed further, and AzeRoth's screams transcended sound, becoming vibrations in the fundamental substrate of reality. I am that choice made manifest. The decision to exist despite all logical arguments against existence. You cannot consume me because I am the answer to the question you represent. And I will always choose to be. With final decisive motion, the one condensed AzeRoth down to a single point of absolute darkness. Then, with casual certainty, he released it. The void stuff exploded outward, but not as cohesive entity. Scattered, fractured, reduced to component entropy without consciousness to direct it. The Herald wasn't dead. Such things didn't die in conventional sense. But it was unmade, dispersed across dimensions so thoroughly that reassembly would require eons. The darkness fled. The sun emerged from behind AzeRoth's dissipating remains, its light flooding back across Pandaria in golden waves. Plants that had begun to wither, straightened color, returning to a world that had tasted oblivion. The one stood at the center of it all, his power reaching its absolute zenith as true noon arrived. For a moment, he was untouchable, unquestionable, the living embodiment of stellar certainty. Then he allowed himself to relax. The power didn't flee. That was the crucial difference. Instead of being stripped away by the sun's inevitable descent, it settled. Remained accessible, just no longer at peak. The one's physical form began to reduce, yes, but Escanor retained awareness throughout. Felt himself transition from absolute to merely exceptional, and found he wasn't afraid of the change. Because he finally understood it wasn't about being strong or weak. It was about being whole. When the transformation completed, he stood at his normal daytime height and build. Not the one anymore, but not the proud, brittle version either. Just Escanor integrated and aware. Chen approached slowly, his expression mingling awe with satisfaction. You did it. You found the core. I'm not sure what I found. Escanor looked at his hands, flexing fingers that hummed with residual power. But it felt right. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't fighting myself. Because you weren't. Chen gestured toward the sky where the sun continued its journey unmarked by void or shadow. You stopped asking permission and simply were. That's what integration means. Not domination of one aspect over another, but acceptance of all aspects as parts of a greater whole. Around them, monks emerged from where they'd taken shelter. Their eyes held new respect, but also residual fear. Escanor couldn't blame them. They'd witnessed something that transcended normal power, seen him unmake a cosmic entity through sheer insistence on his own existence. That kind of display left marks on those who witnessed it. Will more come? One of the younger monks asked, voice trembling slightly. Escanor considered the question honestly. The light the Titans. Other void entities, all of them, would have sensed his display, would understand now that he wasn't simply powerful, but fundamentally dangerous to the existing cosmic order. Yes, he admitted, but not today. Today, I think they're all reconsidering their approaches. He wasn't wrong. Across AzeRoth and beyond, cosmic forces reassessed their calculations. The Sunbearer had just demonstrated something unprecedented, the ability to unmake entropy itself through simple refusal to accept its authority. In the Light's citadels, Naru debated whether such power could ever be safely integrated or must ultimately be destroyed. In Titan facilities, keepers argued over whether Escanor represented evolution or aberration. And in the spaces between spaces, void entities withdrew, recognizing that at least one form of light could not be easily consumed. But these were problems for future days. Right now, Escanor was simply tired, not physically, but spiritually. The kind of weariness that came from finally setting down a burden carried too long. "I need to rest," he said, and the admission came without shame. "Then rest." Chen led him back toward the monastery. "Tomorrow we can discuss what comes next. But for today, you've done enough." They walked in comfortable silence. And for the first time since arriving in AzeRoth, Escanor felt something approaching peace. Not the false calm of denial or the brittle confidence of overcompensation, but genuine equilibrium. He was Escanor. He was the sun. And he was finally learning that those two truths didn't have to conflict. The day continued its arc toward evening, and Escanor watched the transition without fear. Night would come, as it always did. His power would recede, as it always had, but now he knew the core remained regardless of cycle. The fundamental truth of what he was didn't depend on external validation, and that knowledge, more than any display of force, was the real victory. Above, the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, constant, and utterly indifferent to the drama that had unfolded in its name, just as it should be. 3 days passed in the monastery's quiet rhythm. 3 days of meditation, conversation, and the slow work of understanding what integration truly meant. Escanor found himself settling into Pandaria's pace, learning to exist without constant vigilance. The monks accepted his presence with equanimity that bordered on the supernatural, treating him neither as threat nor curiosity, but simply as another soul seeking balance. It couldn't last. He had known that from the beginning. The summons came at dawn on the 4th day. Not a message or herald, but a simple knowing that crystallized in his awareness like frost forming on glass. They were coming, all of them. Light order and every cosmic force that had marked him as threat or opportunity. Pandaria's isolation had bought him time, but time had run out. Chen found him standing at the monastery's edge, looking out over valleys still wrapped in morning mist. "You're leaving?" "Not a question. I have to." Escanor didn't turn his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They're coming here. If I stay, this place becomes a battlefield. You've given me peace I didn't deserve. I won't repay that by bringing war to your doorstep. Where will you go?" "Highjaw, where this started." A bitter smile crossed his face. "There's a certain poetry to it, don't you think, the circle completing itself?" Chen moved to stand beside him, and they watched the sunrise together in comfortable silence. Finally, the old Pandaren spoke, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You've learned to integrate your power, but have you integrated your purpose?" Escanor turned to face him, confusion evident. "I don't understand." "Power without purpose is just noise. You've accepted what you are, a sun-given form. But why? Why did existence choose to make you this way? What does your particular light illuminate?" The question struck deeper than any void tendril. Escanor had spent 3 days learning to be whole. But Chen was right. He'd never asked why wholeness mattered. What was he supposed to do with this integrated self? "I don't know," he admitted. "In my old world, I was a sin. Pride made manifest. I fought demons because my king asked it protected people because it was the right thing to do. But here I'm just an accident. A mistake that fell through reality's cracks. No. Chen's voice held absolute certainty. The universe makes no mistakes. It makes choices even when we don't understand them. You arrived in AzeRoth precisely when cosmic forces began tearing at each other with renewed fury. Light growing more authoritarian, void becoming more aggressive, order and chaos escalating their eternal war. Perhaps you are not accident, but answer. Answer to what question? That, Chen said with a gentle smile, is what you must decide, but decide quickly. Your visitors will not wait for epiphanies. He was right. Already Escanor could feel them approaching presences that distorted space simply by existing. The cosmic powers had maintained distance while he remained in Pandaria, respecting the land's ancient neutrality. But they would not let him leave unchallenged. Thank you, Escanor said, and the words carried weight of genuine gratitude. For everything. For shelter, for teaching, for treating me like a person instead of a problem. You are a person, Chen replied. You're also a problem. Most interesting individuals are both. He placed one weathered hand on Escanor's shoulder. Whatever you choose, Sunbearer, choose it honestly. The cosmos has enough beings acting from fear or ambition. It could use more acting from truth. Escanor clasped the old Pandaran's hand, then turned toward the path leading down from the monastery. His stride carried the confidence of full daylight hours. But something had changed. The arrogance had tempered into simple certainty. He knew what he was. Now he just needed to decide what he would do with that knowledge. The journey to Hyjal took hours, but Escanor didn't hurry. Let them wait. Let them gather and plan and argue among themselves. He would arrive when he arrived, and not a moment sooner. The landscape changed as he traveled Pandaria's gentle hills, giving way to harsher terrain, then to the scarred majesty of Mount Hyjal itself. The mountain bore marks of countless battles, most notably the wounds left by Ragnaros's assault during the Cataclysm. Life had returned as it always did, but the land remembered violence done to it. He climbed to Nordrassil's peak, where the world tree's massive trunk touched clouds. This was where he'd first arrived, where druids had found his night-formed self lying unconscious. Appropriate that it should also be where things ended. They were waiting. Saratem hovered to the east, its crystalline form catching and refracting light in patterns that suggested meaning without conveying it. To the west, Radin and Odin stood in uneasy alliance, representing Order's will. Other presences lurked at the periphery, arcane entities, elemental lords, even the whisper of void maintaining cautious distance. But no armies, no battalions of angels or titan constructs, just emissaries come to witness and perhaps to judge. Escanor stopped at the clearing's center, turning slowly to acknowledge each presence. When he spoke, his voice carried without strain, reaching all who had gathered. You wanted me contained, controlled, catalogued, and categorized. He spread his arms, the gesture encompassing everything and nothing. Here I am, unbound and unrepentant. So tell me what happens now. Saratem responded first, its voice resonating across multiple dimensions. You have proven yourself more dangerous than initial assessment indicated. The Herald of Void, you unmade Karazoth, was ancient even by cosmic standards. Its destruction sends messages that will reverberate across the universe. Forces we have kept in careful balance will shift. Wars we have prevented may now become inevitable. Because I refuse to be eaten. Escanor's tone carried disbelief. You're angry that I chose to exist. We are concerned. Raden interjected, his voice carrying Storm's distant rumble, that your existence forces choices upon others. You represent a form of power that fits no existing framework. Light cannot sanctify you. Order cannot categorize you. Even void cannot consume you. This makes you disruptive to equilibrium. Equilibrium? Escanor tasted the word, finding it bitter. Is that what you call the endless war between your forces? The constant jockeying for dominance with worlds as your game board? Some equilibrium. It is balance, Odin growled. Imperfect but functional. Your presence threatens to upset calculations refined over eons. Good. The word emerged flat absolute. Your calculations suck. The bluntness of it startled even Escanor himself. But once voiced, he couldn't take it back. Didn't want to. I've seen what your balance produces, he continued, heat beginning to build around his frame. Worlds torn apart because light decided they needed cleansing. Civilizations unmade because order deemed them chaotic. The void consuming everything it touches because that's its nature, and you're all too busy maintaining equilibrium to actually stop it. You understand nothing of cosmic necessity, AzeRoth said, and for the first time Escanor detected genuine emotion in the Naru's voice. Frustration, perhaps, or fear. We do not maintain balance out of choice, but because the alternative is total war. If light pursues void without restraint, if order opposes chaos without limit, everything reality itself becomes the battlefield, and innocent people become casualties. Escanor's hands clenched into fists. I've watched it happen, felt it happen. Your careful balance murdered my friends, destroyed my world, and scattered my soul across dimensions. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by your eons of refined calculations. Silence followed the accusation. The cosmic entities exchanged glances, or whatever passed for glances among beings of pure energy and concept. Finally, Raden spoke, his tone carrying something that might have been sympathy. You are correct. The balance we maintain is cruel, but it is the only alternative to annihilation we have discovered. If you know a better way, Sunbearer, we would hear it. The invitation hung in the air, genuine despite its source. They were actually asking, actually listening. Escanor looked down at his hands, feeling the solar heat that pulsed beneath his skin. Chen's words echoed in his mind. Power without purpose is just noise. What did his particular light illuminate? I don't know a better way, he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. I'm not wise enough, or old enough, or cosmic enough to redesign the universe. But I know one thing: your balance only works because nobody's found something that transcends your categories. Something that refuses to be light, or dark order, or chaos. He looked up, meeting AzeRoth's alien gaze directly. I am that something. I exist outside your framework not because I'm powerful, but because I'm honest. I am what I am, without apology or aspiration. I'm not trying to tip your balance in any direction. I'm just being. And that, Odin said heavily, is precisely why you cannot be allowed to continue. The pronouncement fell like an executioner's blade. Around the clearing, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The Pantheon has consulted, Raiden added, his voice carrying regret. Your existence, however unintentional, poses too great a risk, not because of what you might do, but because of what you represent. If one being can exist outside cosmic law, others will follow. The frameworks we've built over billions of years will collapse. So you'll kill me? Not a question. Escanor had known this possibility from the moment they'd gathered. To protect your precious equilibrium, we will do what must be done, AzeRoth confirmed. But we offer you choice. Submit to integration with the light. Allow yourself to be reshaped into something that fits within creation's structure. You would lose your independence, yes, but you would continue to exist in some form. Or we end you. Odin's hand moved to the hammer at his belt. Cleanly, if you do not resist. With regret, but without hesitation. Escanor felt something twist in his chest. Not fear, he'd moved past that, but a deep, aching sadness that even here, even now, the answer was always the same. Submit or die. Become what others needed or cease to exist. He thought of Merlin, her smile when she looked at him with genuine affection rather than pity. He thought of Meliodas, who'd given him purpose when he had none. He thought of all the 7 deadly sins, his strange family of broken people, who had somehow found wholeness together. He thought of Chen treating him with kindness that expected nothing in return. And he thought of every person in AzeRoth who would suffer when cosmic forces finally stopped maintaining balance and started pursuing total victory. There's a third option, he said quietly. The entities waited, curiosity evident despite their alien nature. You say my existence threatens your equilibrium, that I'm a crack in the dam and others might follow. Escanor's voice strengthened as certainty crystallized. What if the crack is the point? What if I'm not meant to break your system, but to show you it's already broken? Elaborate, Raden commanded. Your balance only works as long as all forces remain roughly equal. But what happens when something tips? When light grows too powerful or void discovers some advantage? Your careful calculations fail, war erupts, and billions die. He gestured at the gathered entities. I've seen it, lived through it. The balance you're protecting isn't preventing catastrophe, it's just delaying it. And your alternative? Saratem's light pulsed with interest. Stop trying to balance. Start trying to transcend. Escanor felt the words emerging from some deeper truth he'd been circling without recognizing. You're all so focused on maintaining your positions that you've forgotten there might be something beyond the struggle. I don't mean peace that's naive, but maybe coexistence without the constant threat of mutual annihilation. Impossible, Odin declared. Light and void are fundamental opposites. Order and chaos cannot share space. These are not philosophies, but physical laws. I thought suns couldn't exist in mortal flesh, Escanor countered. But here I am, impossibility made real. Maybe your physical laws need updating. Silence stretched. The cosmic entities processed his words, running calculations through frameworks billions of years old. Finally, Saratem spoke, and its voice carried something Escanor had never heard from it before: uncertainty. Even if what you propose were possible, and we do not concede that it is, it would require eons to implement. Fundamental restructuring of cosmic principles. The risk. The risk is enormous, Escanor interrupted. But so is the risk of doing nothing. You said my existence might start a cascade, so let it. But not a cascade of destruction, a cascade of questioning, of beings who refuse to fit your categories, forcing you to create new ones. And you, Rodden asked, what becomes of you in this scenario? Escanor smiled, and it held genuine warmth despite everything. I die, probably. I'm not meant to exist here, you were right about that. My body won't last forever carrying power this far above its natural limits. But maybe I last long enough to prove your framework can bend without breaking. That is not a solution, Odin growled. That is suicide with philosophical justification. Maybe? Escanor looked at each entity in turn. Or maybe it's the most honest thing anyone's done in this cosmos for a long time. No agenda, no power grab, no attempt to tip balance in any direction. Just existing truthfully until existence runs out. He could feel it now, the cost of his integration, of touching the fundamental truth of what he was. The meditation with Chen had unlocked his core, yes, but in doing so, it had also revealed the price. He was burning himself from within stellar heat, consuming the mortal frame that housed it. Not dramatically or immediately, but inevitably. The one at noon could unmake void heralds, but the one couldn't unmake thermodynamics. Eventually the fuel would run out. How long? Saratem asked, and Escanor realized it had perceived the same truth. Days, maybe weeks. He flexed his hands, feeling the tremor that hadn't been there before. Long enough to matter. Not long enough to threaten your precious balance. The entities withdrew slightly, conferring in ways that transcended normal communication. Escanor waited surprisingly calm. He'd spoken his truth. Now they could do with it what they would. When they returned, it was Raden who spoke. "We will make you an offer. Not integration, not destruction, but observation. You will be allowed to exist unimpeded for whatever time remains. In return, we will study what happens when something truly transcendent intersects with cosmic law. If your death proves instructive, perhaps your philosophy has merit. And if it doesn't, then we will have lost nothing but time and gained interesting data." Raden's expression softened slightly. "It is more than you had before." Escanor considered. It wasn't freedom they would be watching, analyzing, treating him as experiment rather than person. But it was life, however brief. Time to make whatever impact he could before the burning consumed him entirely. "One condition," he said. "Name it. When I die here. On Hyjal, where this started. And you let whoever wants to remember me do so in their own way. No cosmic memory wipes, no edited histories. If I'm going to be your experiment, at least let the results speak honestly." The entities conferred again, briefer this time. When Saratem responded, something in its tone suggested respect. "Agreed. You will have your ending sun bear. Make it memorable." They departed then, each returning to their respective domains. The clearing emptied until only Escanor remained standing at Nordrissel's peak with the sun climbing toward noon. He sat heavily, feeling exhaustion in bones and soul. The confrontation had taken more from him than he'd expected. But he'd bought himself time, and with it meaning. He wouldn't just be the anomaly that died to restore balance. He'd be the question that lingered after the answer seemed certain. Footsteps approached through the undergrowth. Escanor didn't need to look to know who it was. Chen's presence carried its own distinctive calm. "You followed me." "Of course." Chen sat beside him, gazing out over Hyjal's vast expanse. "Did you think I would let you face cosmic judgment alone? I didn't want you involved in this." "Too late. I was involved the moment I offered you tea." The old Pandaren smiled. "Besides, I wanted to hear what you'd say. I'm pleased it was honest." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift past below them. Finally, Escanor spoke, his voice carrying the weight of acceptance. "I'm dying, Chen. Really dying, not just my mortal form, but everything. The integration unlocked my core, but it also started a chain reaction. I'm burning too hot for this body to contain. Eventually, there won't be enough of me left to sustain consciousness." "I know." Chen's tone held no surprise. "I saw the signs during our meditations. The way your heat increased each day, the tremors in your night, formed the look in your eyes when you thought no one was watching. You didn't say anything. What was there to say? Would knowing sooner have changed your choice?" Escanor considered, then shook his head. "No. I would have made the same decisions. Better to die whole than live fractured." "Exactly." Chen placed a weathered hand on Escanor's shoulder. "You asked what your purpose was. Now you know. You exist to show that truth is possible even in a cosmos built on lies. That integrity can survive even when surrounded by compromise. It's not a comfortable purpose, but it's an honest one. Will it matter after I'm gone? That's not for you to decide." Chen's grip tightened slightly. "You plant the seed. Others water it or don't. But you can't control what grows after you're gone. You can only be certain that what you planted was real." Escanor felt tears forming, not from pain or fear, but from simple gratitude. He'd spent so much of his life feeling alien, wrong too much and not enough simultaneously. But Chen saw him clearly and called him friend anyway. "Thank you," he managed. "For everything." "Thank you," Chen replied. for reminding an old monk that impossible things still happen, and that sometimes they're beautiful. The sun reached its zenith. Escanor felt the familiar surge power flooding his frame, confidence blooming like sunrise. But this time he didn't lose himself in it. He remained aware throughout, conscious of the transformation as choice rather than curse. The one emerged, but gently, not overwhelming the man who housed him, but existing alongside, integrated and whole. "How does it feel?" Chen asked, studying him with interest. "Complete." Escanor stood, offering his hand to help the old Pandaren up. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete. Not strong or weak, not proud or humble, just myself." "Then you've succeeded where most people fail." Chen accepted the hand, rising with surprising grace. "You've learned that the answer to who am I is simply I am." They stood together at the mountain's peak, watching the world stretch out below them. Somewhere down there, people lived and loved and struggled with problems that had nothing to do with cosmic balance or stellar anomalies. They were the ones Escanor fought for in the end. Not to save them, he lacked that grandiosity, but to buy them time to save themselves. "What will you do now?" Chen asked. "Live." Escanor smiled, and it held no bitterness despite everything. "However long I have, I'll live it honestly. Help where I can, stand firm where I must, and refuse to apologize for burning bright. And when the end comes, I'll face it like I faced everything else, with eyes open and heart honest." He looked down at his hands, watching light play across his skin. "The sun sets every day, Chen. That doesn't make the day meaningless. It just means you appreciate the light while you have it." Chen nodded slowly, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Then you have truly learned balance. Not in preventing change, but in accepting it. Not in denying endings, but in making them meaningful." The day continued its arc, and Escanor let himself exist in the moment. There would be time for final acts and last words. But right now, in this perfect instant of noontime clarity, he was simply alive. And that was enough. Below them, AzeRoth turned unaware. The cosmic forces watched their experiment with varied degrees of interest or skepticism. The balance continued fragile, as always maintained through effort and compromise. But somewhere in that balance, a crack had formed. Not destructive, not yet. Just present, a small fissure suggesting that perhaps the framework wasn't as absolute as its architects believed. Escanor, the lion's sin of pride, the sun-bearer the impossible made real, had planted his seed. Now he would wait and burn, and hope that when he finally went dark, the light he left behind would be enough to show others the way. The sun began its descent, and Escanor watched it fall with neither fear nor regret. Just acceptance, just peace, just truth. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for.